Welcome back, Addicts, to another review video. I'm Josh, and today we're going to be talking about Luke Cage Season 2. So getting right into it, I want to recap a little bit about the events of Season 2. I'm going to keep them very vague and spoiler-free so the people that haven't seen Season 2 won't be spoiled here. So basically, this takes place shortly after the events of the Defenders. We see Luke being much more confident after helping defeat the Hand, as well as getting his power boost in Season 1. And he's back in Harlem and dealing with thugs, doing a really good job at it. And he's also really comfortable with Claire, and you get to see their relationship kind of grow a little bit closer. But this all starts to change when Luke Cage's father returns to Harlem, and also we get Bushmaster and the Jamaican gang enter into Harlem and start taking up turf. Now, there are a few characters that are new to the show, but they're not necessarily new because they were introduced in other Netflix shows. For instance, we have Danny Rand, Colleen, and Foggy, but we also have new characters in general, such as James Lucas, Luke Cage's father, and also Bushmaster, as well as some others that we haven't seen from Season 1 or we saw very little of. I'm going to jump right into my highlights, try to keep this short for you guys. I thought between the first season and this season, they did a really good job on doing better with the fight scenes. The fight scenes are a lot on a bigger scale, and they seem to have a bit longer choreographing. It's very fun to watch, and I do think they topped the first season in that regard, especially with fights and the villains, which I'll get into the villains a little bit later. One of the other things I wanted to highlight was the soundtrack. The soundtrack was really good in the first season, and they did a great job in this one too, although I did like it better. And I don't know if that's maybe just it was more along the lines of my type of music, or maybe it was just there was more variety in the songs that they chose for the second season, but I thought it was really good. The villains was probably the biggest highlight, though, however, because they were tremendously better than the first season, at least in my opinion. In the first season, we got a great introduction to an awesome villain, Cottonmouth, and the actor did a really great job of bringing that character to life and added a lot of charisma to that character. But they kind of fouled up because he ended up dying really early on in the season, or about halfway, and the villains that they have take over just didn't have that same feel. You had Luke's other brother, which I'm Diamondback, I think, if that's remembered right. If I'm not remembering that name right, I apologize, but I believe his name was Diamondback. And then we also got Mariah, which was Cottonmouth's cousin. And both of those characters, I don't know, they were okay, but they kind of fell flat towards the end of Season 1. And even though we don't see Diamondback in the second season, we get Bushmaster, which I believe is a much better villain, or I should say antagonist for Luke Cage. He's got a bit different backstory than he does in the comics, but it was really good here, and I honestly felt more connected to him through the background that they gave him. Now, Mariah is, I would say, more fleshed out than ever before. Her character, she gets a lot of depth added with the chemistry with her daughter being pulled into the story, as well as they give more backstory to her, and they just kind of do a better job of expanding her character. And I really liked where they started off and ended up in this season with her character. And the things that they did change or highlighted on more with her let the other side of the story, the criminal or the crime element, it really gave you that mobster type feel. And it expanded on it even more so than the other seasons did. And quite frankly, I think it's more on par with the Daredevil show, which still not as good in that regard, but it's getting to that level, which I did really enjoy. Probably my favorite parts of the entire show was the connections with the other characters that we've seen in the other shows, such as Danny and Luke getting that Heroes for Hire moment, which in episode 10, that's when we really get that, and that was probably my favorite episode of the season. Another one that I really liked was Colleen and Misty. There was a scene with them in a bar where they kind of are talking and sharing their thoughts on the events of what is happening in the Defenders, as well as getting into some trouble. And that whole scene played out really well, and I really liked that connection. Another big highlight for me, which was something I wasn't sure how well they were going to do, was the fights between Luke and Bushmaster. The Bushmaster character in this is more of the antagonist for Luke, not so much the main villain. The main villain is still very much Mariah, but the way that they did Bushmaster was very entertaining, and their fight scenes were, I thought, a huge step up from the other ones we had with Luke in Season 1. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about the ending, which I am going to go into a little bit of spoilers, so if you don't want to hear that, I'll put in the description timestamp so you can skip forward to my recommendation. But this is your spoiler warning. I'm going to talk about the ending. So, at the end, we get to see that Luke is taking over Harlem's Paradise, and he's seemingly being set up to be a villain, which I'm really curious to see where this goes. I'm not sure if this is something in the next season that he's going to, like, they'll start with him being as kind of like this villain-esque character, and then very early on in the next season, he's going to be like, oh, okay, I was in the wrong train of thought, let's do something different. Or if they're actually setting him up to be a villain for maybe one of the other Netflix characters, maybe he's going to have some tension with Danny, seeing as Danny was trying to get him on the right track, and it seems like Luke has kind of steered off again into this other direction. Of course, it might be just a misstep, or maybe they're trying to go in a direction that seems really interesting. Either way, I really did like the ending. The Mariah's death was something I wasn't expecting at all, but I really did appreciate it because her character, I felt it was complete. There wasn't anything really I was wanting to see more of, and some of the cider characters like Shades and maybe even Bushmaster coming back was something that I want to see more of the Mariah story, but I thought they did a really good job of rounding out and finishing out Mariah's story. I really hope for more Heroes for Hire. Like I said, that was one of my favorite episodes of this season, and arguably I want to see maybe a whole show of Heroes for Hire. But even if they incorporate it in more of the next season, I'd be fine with that too. But it's I don't want to do any predictions for the next seasons, but those are just kind of some of my thoughts on it. The other big highlight for the end of the show was that they didn't kill off Bushmaster. This is a lot of things that I think the MCU has a lot of flaws for. They take really great villains, and a lot of times they just get rid of them. Now, the Netflix shows are a little bit better, like we've seen with the Kingpin and the main villain for the Punisher. They've kept those characters around. But like instances like Kilgrave, that was a really great villain that they just killed off after the first season when you wanted to see more of them. And, you know, obviously with the MCU movies, they have a really hit or miss with some of them. Luckily, they're starting to change that, and I'm glad that it's getting into the Netflix shows as well. But that's about all I'm going to do for my spoiler talk, so I'm going to get right into my recommendation and rating for this. I highly recommend it if you're a superhero fanatic, or if you want to see more of Marvel and their shared universe, or if you want a crime show with a different type of element. This season focuses more on the crime, so I think people that like more of a crime can enjoy the season a bit more too than maybe the first season. But if you like the first season, I think you'll like this season as well. I thought it did a lot of things better than the first season, and so for that, I would rate it about a 7 out of 10. It was a solid season, and I did like a lot of improvements. It wasn't anything that blew me away, and I don't think I would put it on maybe some of the other shows like maybe Daredevil or Jessica Jones Season 1. But it was very solid, and I do highly recommend it for you guys. But anyway, that is going to conclude this review video. And if you want to stay tuned for any of our other content, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can check us out on our social media accounts on Instagram and Twitter at AddictInformative. Or you can check us out on our main site, addictinformative.wordpress.com. for all of our latest stuff. We have a bunch of written stuff as well as videos. And we also have a podcast on SoundCloud called Intervention Prevention, and it comes out every Sunday. So anyway, guys, we'll see you in the next video. Later, addicts.